April 26, 1986. On 23 a.m. Northern Ukraine, the Soviet Union's Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Red warning lights began flashing in the Reactor 4 control room. Gauge needles exceeded danger levels. The reactor output was surging. That night, technicians were conducting a safety test, an experiment to see how long the turbines' inertia could generate electricity when power supply was cut off. But during the experiment, reactor output dropped more sharply than expected, from the rated output of 3,200 megawatts down to just 30 megawatts. To raise the output again, technicians withdrew most of the control rods. According to reactor safety regulations, at least 30 control rods must always remain inserted. But at that moment, only 6 control rods were inserted in the control room. The reactor became extremely unstable. Output suddenly began surging. 200 megawatts, 500 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts. Control was impossible. The technicians pressed the emergency shutdown button. AZ-5, an emergency device that inserts control rods into the reactor core to stop the nuclear fission reaction. But the moment the control rods descended, something unexpected happened. Reactor output surged even more dramatically, increasing 100-fold per second. 3,000 megawatts, 10,000 megawatts, 30,000 megawatts. It exceeded 10 times the rated output. Every alarm in the control room sounded simultaneously. The technicians screamed, and exactly 10 seconds later, explosion. The 200-ton reactor lid flew into the air. 190 tons of nuclear fuel were exposed to the atmosphere. It was the beginning of the worst nuclear accident in human history. And all of this happened in just 10 minutes. The explosion happened twice. The first explosion occurred at 12:43 a.m. It was a steam explosion. Water inside the reactor instantly boiled and turned to steam, creating tremendous pressure. Pressure increased hundreds of atmospheres per second. The reactor top bulged upward. Massive cracks appeared in the concrete walls. And exactly 2 seconds later, the second explosion. This time it was a hydrogen explosion. The graphite composing the reactor heated above 2,000 degrees, reacting with water to create hydrogen gas, which then exploded upon meeting oxygen in the air. The explosion force equaled 10 tons of TNT. The 200-ton reactor lid shot vertically upward. The lid rotated 90 degrees in midair, tilting sideways and lodging in the reactor opening. The core was completely exposed. 190 tons of nuclear fuel lay bare under the night sky. Nuclear fuel melted at 2,000 degrees flowed like red lava. This is called corium, a combination of core and ceramic. The most dangerous substance humanity has created. Thousands of graphite blocks flew in all directions from the explosion. Some flew more than 200 meters away. Graphite pieces that fell on nearby building roofs started fires. The roof of turbine building 3 also began burning. Witnesses saw blue light shooting into the night sky. It was Cherenkov radiation, a phenomenon that occurs when radioactive particles pass through the atmosphere. Faster than the speed of light, that beautiful blue light was a signal of death. The amount of radioactive material released by the explosion equaled 400 times. The Hiroshima atomic bomb. Iodine 131, cesium 137, strontium 90, plutonium 239. These radioactive isotopes spread across Europe on the wind. 10 minutes after the explosion, radiation levels in Pripyat city soared to 10,000 times normal. Radioactive concentration per cubic meter of air reached 15,000 roentgens per hour, a level at which humans die within 5 minutes. But no warning was given to residents. 50,000 residents of Pripyat city, 3 kilometers from the reactor, were still sleeping at this moment, knowing nothing. The Soviet government remained silent. For a long time, the world blamed the Chernobyl accident on human error. They said the technicians ignored safety procedures. The Soviet government accepted this explanation. Blaming individuals allowed them to hide systemic flaws. A trial was held, and the plant director and chief engineer were sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. They died in prison. But the truth was different. The real culprit was the RBMK reactor itself. RBMK-2, a graphite-moderated boiling water reactor designed by the Soviet Union. The Soviets were proud of this reactor. Construction costs were 30% cheaper than Western reactors, and construction time was shorter. But this reactor hid fatal design flaws. First flaw: graphite tips on control rods. Control rods are devices inserted into the reactor to slow nuclear fission. They're typically made of neutron-absorbing materials like boron or cadmium. But RBMK reactor control rods had 5-meter-long graphite tips attached to their ends. Graphite doesn't absorb neutrons. Instead, it slows neutrons down, promoting nuclear fission. When control rods were inserted, the graphite tips entered the core first, causing nuclear fission reactions to surge. Moreover, there was a 1-meter hollow gap between the control rod and fuel channel. When control rods were fully withdrawn and then reinserted, water filling this hollow gap was replaced by graphite tips, causing reactivity to spike. This is why the AZ-5 emergency shutdown button actually triggered the explosion. Second flaw, positive void coefficient. When water inside the reactor boils and turns to steam, cooling effectiveness decreases and temperature rises. Most reactors automatically reduce nuclear fission reactions in this situation. Negative feedback effect. When temperature rises, reactions decrease, stabilizing the system. But RBMK was the opposite. The more steam there was, the faster nuclear fission became. Positive feedback effect? When temperature rises, reactions speed up, raising temperature further. Once this vicious cycle started, it couldn't be stopped. Third flaw, absence of containment building. Western reactors are surrounded by thick concrete and steel dome containment buildings. Even if an accident occurs, this is the last line of defense, preventing radioactive materials from escaping outside. But RBMK reactors had no containment building. For cost reduction, the reactor was simply inside an ordinary industrial building. The Soviet government knew about these flaws. The problem had already emerged in 1975, when a partial core meltdown accident occurred at the Leningrad nuclear power plant. Soviet scientists warned, RBMK reactors are extremely unstable at low power states, but the government hid it. Because of the cost and time for design, changes, and political reasons to showcase the superiority of Soviet nuclear technology. They didn't even inform the technicians about these flaws. They didn't know the reactor they were operating was a bomb. And on April 26, 1986, that flaw exploded. This is the first reversal. Chernobyl was destroyed not by human error, but by design flaws. The technicians were scapegoats. Immediately after the explosion, a call came to the Pripyat fire station. A fire had broken out at the Chernobyl plant. The firefighters thought it was an ordinary fire. There was no warning about radiation. They rushed to the scene in fire trucks. When they arrived, what they saw was hell itself. The reactor building's roof had blown off with enormous flames shooting skyward. But something was strange. Blue light was glowing within the flames. The air tasted metallic. It was the feeling of radiation stimulating nerves. Firefighters cleared debris with bare hands. They picked up and threw hot graphite pieces. They felt their palms burning, but didn't know it was from radiation. One firefighter put a graphite piece in his pocket as a souvenir. He died a week later. The fire was extinguished in 6 hours, but 50 of 80 firefighters were hospitalized. It was acute radiation syndrome. Skin burned away, hair fell out, internal organs melted. 29 died within 2 weeks. The first to die were 2 plant workers. One was in the pump room during the explosion and died instantly from scalding water burns. His body remains buried in the reactor debris to this day. Recovery was impossible. The Soviet government realized the crisis. The reactor continued burning. Radiation was spreading across Europe. Alarms went off at Sweden's Forsmark nuclear plant. Swedish scientists tracked the radiation cloud, and only then did the world learn of Chernobyl. The Soviet Union mobilized 600,000 liquidators, soldiers, miners, technicians, even prisoners. They had 3 missions. First, extinguish the fire and contain the radiation. Second, clean the area around the reactor. Third, cover the reactor with a concrete sarcophagus. Helicopter pilots flew over the reactor dropping materials. 5,000 tons of sand, 2,400 tons of lead, 1,800 tons of boron, clay, and dolomite. A total of 5,000 sorties. Each flight exposed them to lethal radiation. Many pilots died of cancer years later, but a problem arose. The dropped materials actually increased the reactor's internal temperature. Sand and lead melted and flowed like lava to the reactor floor. This radioactive lava is called corium. Corium began penetrating the concrete floor, descending underground at a rate of 30 centimeters per day. If it reached groundwater, a massive steam explosion could occur. All of Europe could become uninhabitable. 400 miners were deployed. They had to dig a tunnel under the reactor and install a cooling system. They dug a 150-meter tunnel in 1 month. Average daily temperature 50 degrees, radiation levels over 1 Röntgen per hour. Many worked without clothes. It was too hot. They succeeded in stopping the corium, but the cost was high. A quarter of the miners died before age 40. Thousands of graphite pieces still littered the reactor roof. Radiation levels reached 10,000 roentgens per hour, a level humans couldn't endure for more than 5 minutes. Robots were deployed, but radiation destroyed their electronic circuits, and they stopped working. Ultimately, people had to go up themselves. They worked in 90-second shifts. They shoveled graphite and threw it into the reactor, then ran away. More than 3,000 people were deployed for this work. Many died of cancer years later. The official death toll is 31, but the World Health Organization, WHO, estimates 9,000, and the environmental group Greenpeace estimates 93,000. The truth remains buried. For 36 hours after the explosion, Pripyat residents knew nothing. The government remained silent. Children went to school, people went to work. Weddings were held on the streets. But airborne radiation levels were lethal. April 27th, 11 a.m. Finally, a broadcast went out. Dear residents, an accident has occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The radiation situation is unstable. Temporary evacuation will begin at 2 p.m. You will return in 3 days, so pack only necessary items. 3 days. They never returned. At 2 p.m., when 200 buses entered Pripyat, buses mobilized from across the Soviet Union. 50,000 residents boarded buses carrying 1 bag each. Children had to leave their toys behind on the buses. On the grounds, they might be contaminated with radiation. The city was emptied in 3 hours. Pripyat became a ghost city. What they left behind was everything. Apartment furniture, school desks, hospital beds, amusement park Ferris wheels. The amusement park was scheduled to open on May 1st, Labor Day. The Ferris wheel never turned once. Residents were sent to temporary housing 150 kilometers south of Kyiv. The government provided them with new apartments, but compensation was minimal. All the property they left behind was contaminated with radiation and discarded. Evacuation didn't end with Pripyat. A 30-kilometer radius around the reactor was designated an exclusion zone. 116 villages, 360,000 people were forcibly relocated. Many of them wanted to return home. Especially the elderly insisted. Some secretly returned to live. They were called samosli, voluntary returnees. The government cracked down, but couldn't stop them. As of the 2020s, about 100 people still live inside the exclusion zone. They eat vegetables they've grown and drink well water. All contaminated with radiation, but they don't care. I'm old anyway. Better to die in my homeland. Pripyat has been abandoned for 38 years. Buildings are collapsing, trees are growing, wild animals have returned. Wolves, wild boars, lynx, even brown bears. Radiation drove humans away, but nature returned. Ironic. Immediately after the 1986 explosion, the Soviet Union covered the reactor with a concrete sarcophagus, a structure hastily built in 6 months. The sarcophagus successfully contained the radiation, but there was a problem. The sarcophagus was a temporary structure. Design lifespan 30 years. By 2016, the sarcophagus was at risk of collapse. Cracks had formed, and rain was leaking in. The international community spent $2 billion building a new sarcophagus. The new safe confinement, 109 meters high, 257 meters wide, 162 meters long. The largest movable structure humanity has ever built. Weight 36,000 tons. Assembled 300 meters from the reactor, it moved along rails to cover the reactor. Completed November 2016. Design lifespan 100 years. Inside, 2 enormous cranes are installed. They will be used when dismantling the reactor in the future. The new safe confinement seemed perfect. But in February 2022, something unexpected happened. Russia invaded Ukraine. Chernobyl is only 130 kilometers north of Kyiv. It was Russia's shortest invasion route. On February 24th, Russian forces occupied Chernobyl. Combat broke out inside the exclusion zone. Tanks churned up soil, raising radioactive dust. Radiation levels rose 20-fold. At the end of March, Russian forces withdrew. But the damage wasn't over. February 14th, 2025. A Russian drone attacked the new safe confinement. The drone collided with the upper part of the sarcophagus and exploded. Insulation material caught fire, with the blaze lasting a week. A hole was punched in the sarcophagus. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, investigated. On December 6, 2025, a shocking announcement was made. The new safe confinement can no longer contain radiation. Primary safety function has been lost. Radioactive dust could now leak outside through the hole. When it rains, rainwater could enter the sarcophagus and wash out radioactive materials. Repairs are needed but impossible during wartime. This is the second reversal. Chernobyl is still dangerous 38 years later, and the 2025 drone attack has made it more dangerous again. Humanity still cannot fully control Chernobyl. 38 years have passed since Chernobyl exploded. But the disaster hasn't ended. Soil within the 30-kilometer exclusion zone is still contaminated with radiation. The most dangerous radioactive isotope is plutonium-239, half-life 24,000 years. It will take 24,000 years from now for the radiation to reduce by half. To become completely safe requires 10 half-lives, 240,000 years. Humanity evolved into Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago. Chernobyl's radiation will remain for most of human history. The half-life of cesium-137 is 30 years. Cesium-137, released in 1986, was halved by 2016. It will halve again in 2046, but it's still dangerous. Cesium-137 concentration in exclusion zone. Soil averages 100,000 becquerels per kilogram, 100 times the safety standard. The half-life of strontium-90 is 29 years. This substance accumulates in bones, causing leukemia and bone marrow cancer. Even now, children in some regions of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia have high thyroid cancer rates, the generation that were fetuses or children. At the time of the Chernobyl accident, iodine-131 accumulated in their thyroid glands. Belarus suffered the most radiation damage. 23% of the country was contaminated. Because the wind carried the radiation cloud northward, all of Europe was affected. Sweden, Norway, Finland, Poland, Germany, Austria, Italy. In some areas, wild mushrooms and deer meat still test above safety standards for radiation. 200 tons of nuclear fuel still remain inside the Chernobyl reactor. Solidified in corium form, corium flowed into the reactor basement, forming a shape called the elephant's foot. When first photographed in 1996, the radiation near the elephant's foot was strong enough to kill anyone standing there for 5 minutes. Now the radiation has decreased significantly, but it's still inaccessible. No technology yet exists to remove corium. There are plans to dismantle the reactor, using cranes inside the new safe confinement, but feasibility is uncertain. Costs are estimated at a minimum of $100 billion. Who will pay this money? The Soviet Union no longer exists. Ukraine is at war. Chernobyl warns humanity. That nuclear power is an uncontrollable technology. That one mistake, one design flaw, one war can destroy everything. On April 26, 1986, a reactor that exploded in 10 minutes changed all of Europe. It drove 360,000 people from their homes. It killed tens of thousands, and it will curse humanity for over 20,000 years. This is the truth of Chernobyl. Not human error, but design flaws. An unending disaster, and a tragedy that could repeat.